think I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I think I always really wanted to be a barrister. I say that with some degree of self-deprecation. I think I would have made a lousy solicitor because I'm not very good at keeping time records. I'm not necessarily good at getting back to the client within half an hour of the phone call or the email. What I deeply love about the law is legal analysis, and yes, it's also being on my hind legs. I came from a family background which was unashamedly card-carrying intellectual, and the standard way that the family spent time was talking about things, was discussing issues. We didn't sit down with the TV dinner and while away the evening. We tended to start talking about something that was topical or something that was a philosophical problem, and inevitably we took sides, we raised questions. I mean, this is the air I breathed. I went to Brazil just before I was 6, and so my first foreign language was Portuguese, which I learnt very swiftly for the good reason that I wanted to play football with the boys in the street. My adolescent years were spent in Vienna, in Austria, because my father was at that stage working for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which is Vienna-based. And I therefore became, in that rather horrible jargon, I became a UNO-brat, a UN brat or a UN child. But that was also a very important part of my background because that was international public service work. I had a wonderful time at university. I stretched the system to the point where the seams were nearly bursting in terms of, yes, doing my academic work, but I went off and tried everything. I tried student journalism. I ended up editing the student newspaper and then being collected from the offices of the newspaper at 6 o'clock in the morning, having had 2 hours sleep, put the paper together at 4 a.m, so take a sleeping bag, 2 hours sleep, and then my colleagues in the crew would collect me from the offices of Stop Press with Varsity, and we'd go down to the river and we'd have the early morning outing before the 9 o'clock lecture. And so it went on. That worked fine. It worked fine for 6 months until the day after the women's boat race, which we won. Spectacularly, convincingly triumphant moment. We came into the landing stage and there were the local press, some of the national press, photos being taken, and of course the Oxford crew comes in and everyone is grinning happily. We've made it, we've finally done it, including your humble servant. The next day there was a problem. There was no world news. And so the editors put a photo of the winning Oxford women's boat race crew. Front page of the Times, with your humble servant grinning her silly ears off in the centre of the photo. And if I had wished to take a full-page advertisement to explain to the world that actually I had not been perhaps pursuing my studies at the Inns of Court School of Law with the ardour expected of me, I could scarcely have found a better way of announcing it. I was summoned by the then head of the Inns of Court School of Law, and I was carpeted. And after a rather uncomfortable half an hour, I was ejected from his office, but mercifully not from the course, with the words ringing in my ears, "I can tell Sharpston that you will never make anything of a career at the bar because you lack," and then it was something like, "you lack the necessary dedication, application and self-discipline." And I remember coming out of the office and checking that my head was still on my shoulders, and then thinking, you silly man, what do you think I have been demonstrating for the last 6 months? It was quite clear to me quite in the sense of totally clear to me that the bar was not yet a place which was particularly friendly towards women. I remember vividly a moment when I was doing an advocacy exercise. These were taken by experienced barristers who were earning a bit more money after court time and who were usually a little short-tempered perhaps in consequence. And I remember doing a plea in mitigation which was greeted with the words, well, if we've got to have bloody women at the bar, I suppose it's good to have one who sounds like a bloke. I don't think that remark would be regarded as in any way acceptable now. It was very, very clearly accepted that if and to the extent that we were going to have women at the bar, they were not going to get into the intellectually difficult or high-earning areas of the law. And I was like a banana on a coal scuttle. I mean, a woman who wants to do EU law, come on. This is abstract, intellectual, cross-disciplinary, foreign, complicated. No way. Women in that field. And I looked at it, I thought, well, you know, why not? In one sense, it's a classic bar story, except that it was coloured by the fact that I was a woman who wanted to do a particular area of law. And I could not get a place in chambers in London, by place meaning a tenancy, in order to do that work. And so it was a very tortuous route. I went to Brussels, I spent some time working with a law firm there and in chambers in Brussels. I worked for 3 years at the court in Luxembourg for Sir Gordon Slynn as one of his referendaires, his judicial assistants. And finally, but finally is, you know, 10 years call, finally I did get a tenancy in London chambers after 10 years, and then I had to build a practice. And since building a practice from scratch is interesting, to put it mildly, that is where I started doing academic work in parallel with the practice. And of course, both were actually, in fact, full-time. So, well, occasionally I met myself coming the other way on the M11 between London and Cambridge, but more or less it worked. I did sometimes get the government work or the local authority work, and getting the local authority work brought me into a case which has haunted me ever since, which is the metric martyr case, because I acted in that case for Sunderland City Council, prosecuting, I nearly said persecuting, but that is what it was always referred to as, prosecuting the metric martyr for selling a pound of bananas on scales that would weigh only in imperial measure rather than in both imperial and metric measure. And I mean, that case again was, you know, it was a terribly technical case, but it got enormous publicity because it's an early stage. It, if you like, foreshadowed some of the Eurosceptic debates, some of the UKIP debates about what are we doing in the European Union. We should be able to have control of our laws. We should be able to run things as we want to, including selling bananas by the pound. For the avoidance of doubt, EU law never said you couldn't sell them by the pound. It just said you had to indicate the pricing and the weight in metric. But it never said that you couldn't, as Mrs. Smith, go along and say, hello, Mr. Thoburn, I'd like a pound of bananas, please. I took silk in 1999. That was the year before my husband died. I always have trouble placing it, but I took silk in 99. My job title is immensely misleading. I am the British Advocate General at the Court of Justice of the European Union. And that sounds as though I should be there arguing the UK's corner in cases before the court, no doubt wearing a wig and a gown. In fact, I'm a member of the court with a quasi-judicial function, so I sit as a member of the court on the bench, and I'm not an advocate anymore, save in the indirect way that I hope that my opinions are persuasive. And for good measure, I am not therefore British to represent the United Kingdom. I used to think I didn't have to explain the I am not a general bit of the story until I met a delightful old man, sort of very, very upright, military-bearing gentleman of a certain age, at a reception. He said, "So you're the British Advocate General, are you? Jolly good, jolly good. And which regiment do you serve in, hey?" And I had to disabuse him. I did leave him a little disappointed. So not an advocate, not a general, but an independent advisor to the court, giving a very detailed, reasoned opinion. I, like the other 10 advocates general, am there to advise the court on the law which is the court's business, which is the law of the European Union. And one of the richnesses of the court is precisely that it does have people who come from different legal traditions, and we are all reading the same text against our different backgrounds and trying to construe it, trying to make it coherent and intelligent, and yes, trying to come out with an answer which is a just and correct answer. The area of law I work in is the area I always wanted to work in. And I have been very lucky, because at the bar I did EU law, and then I had actually a rather large pro bono practice doing human rights law. And I used to play Robin Hood, because I used to take the money I earned as an EU lawyer to buy my time in order to do the ECHR cases pro bono. And I've always loved EU law because truly and sincerely I do think that what we are trying to do with the European Union, maintaining peace and stability in Europe in a project under the rule of law, is immensely important. I truly believe that.